welcome to another episode of the Wavemakers Podcast, where we learn more about the people in the industry behind the transformation that is happening, digital, decarbonization. All of this affects the industry, but it always ends up being talked about technicalities of it, the risk, the fuels, but what about its people? So, in this podcast series, we are learning about the leaders and how it feels to drive this change. And today with me is Su Yin Anand. And you are a jack of all trades, I think, when it comes to maritime industry. But I would let you introduce yourself, who you are.
Well, thanks, Gordana, and thank you for having me on Wavemakers. It is really a privilege. So to those who don't know me, my name is Su Yin, and indeed, I've worn many hats in the maritime industry over the 2 decades that I've been in the maritime industry. I started off my career as a maritime lawyer, a litigator, and I did that for about 15 years before moving in-house with an Australian mining company, where I continued on as a lawyer for 2 more years. I then had the opportunity to move over to head up their shipping department on the commercial side, which was again another privilege. It was always a goal of mine to move into the commercial side of shipping and be able to contribute to shipping itself and to the industry, because it's always been a passion. In addition to that, I am also an independent director with Hafnia. I also wear the hat of Senior Advisor to the Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonization, and I'm also the co-founder of Captain's Table, which is a maritime innovation pitch competition, which is held out of Hong Kong, but very global in nature. I would say, jack of all trades. I like to think master of some instead of master of none. But it's been an interesting journey so far, and, one where I'm continuously learning through conversations like this that I have. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Wow. I think it is incredible to also be able to see the industry from so many different angles. And what inspired you to join the industry in the first place? How did that feel?
Oh, I think a really, really good question. And I think one that I get asked quite a lot about. I think, on reflection, is it any surprise that I'm in the shipping industry? I think probably not. I always knew I wanted to join an industry that was international in nature, and one that would actually require me to problem solve a lot, because I need to be kept intellectually engaged, and I need to be able to deal with complex situations, and one where I get to meet a lot of people. And, that is the maritime industry. So that's a logical side of why, I'm not surprised I'm in the maritime industry and why I joined the maritime industry. But I also think that, sometimes there's a little bit of destiny that's involved. And if I look at my family, there are a lot of connections to the maritime industry. My father was a timber trader. My uncle was with the Indian Navy. And on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather was one of the first rice merchants in Malacca. So I think if you look at the family as well, there are lots of connections there. And sometimes I do wonder, why is it that, when I first entered law school, I was very clear in my mind that I actually wanted to do maritime law. And there has to be something more than just, liking problem solving or, meeting lots of people from an international community. So, yeah.
I think I can relate to this as well, because my dad is a petroleum engineer. So I grew up with all these technical drawings everywhere around me, and he would take me with him into onto the refinery fields. And I later, when I reflected, it's because that is not so foreign to me. And then I enjoy being also with engineers and working on these things. And it makes sense when you kind of go back, right? And then that path makes sense. But at that time, you're just going after what feels right at that point.
Yes, I can definitely relate to that as well. I mean, growing up, I used to hear the term bills of lading being thrown around the house by my father when he was on calls, or, ports like him going to Ghana, or him going to the Solomon Islands, all these destinations. And I would imagine in my head that one day, I would be involved or work in an industry where I would get the same exposure to these foreign, exotic sounding lands, and, and be involved in something that actually helps connect people around the world. So yeah, things that initially sound foreign when you're young or exciting when you're young, it just influences subconsciously some of the decisions I think that we make in life later.
Yes. And now that you have quite an exposure, which role do you enjoy the most, let's say, right now that resonates the most with you? Maybe?
Oh, wow. Difficult question. I think each of the roles I've had in the industry, I've enjoyed. I think being a maritime lawyer, particularly a litigator, you get to see all the troubles that people get themselves into, but you also then get to use, your legal skills to help them problem solve and hopefully find an amicable commercial resolution that works for both parties. So that was intellectually very, very challenging, and I really like that. But I think a lot of the skill sets that I've picked up from being a maritime litigator, I actually applied across all the various other roles that I've been in. Because I think people often tend to pigeonhole lawyers into just being, handlers of contracts or contract amenders, I think, and those who work off precedents. Well, maybe to some extent, yes, but I think to a large extent, lawyers are very used to ambiguity. Lawyers are very used to complexity, and lawyers often have to keep a very open mind in relation to the problems that are then presented by our clients to us. And I think those skill sets are actually very important skill sets that are necessary for success in an industry like the maritime industry. So, whilst I really enjoy the innovation space and working with innovators, and the commercial space is always very exciting because, you are part of what's happening on a daily basis. I would say that I enjoyed being a maritime litigator the most because I think that's where I really honed my skill sets, and that's also where I gained a lot of confidence in my career journey.
I have read some of your thoughts on the relationship between tennis and leadership. And that's something we have in common because I also used to play tennis, nowadays a bit lesser. But I could really resonate with what you were saying, and even some of the aspects that you now mentioned that can be transferred from law practice to maritime and being a leader. Where else do you draw your inspiration from when it comes to being a leader?
I draw inspiration from the people around me whom I find to be good leaders. And by that, I mean, I've often said to people who ask me, what does it take to be a leader? And I often tell them that, leadership is not derived from a title. Leadership is not derived from status. Anyone can be a good leader. You just have to find something that really fulfills your purpose and that is important to you in order to take a stand on. So I derive a lot of inspiration from my network, my community, particularly amongst my friends and family, whom I believe or whom I respect as being really good leaders. I also read a lot. And I think it's through reading, through challenging my own mindsets and my own perceptions on things that I start, I think I start growing as a leader. And to be very upfront, like one of the podcasts that I really listen to a lot is Adam Grant's Rethinking. Because I think it challenges me to actually rethink some of my own biases.
What's magical about reading is it puts you in the position of that person going through the story, the actor or someone else, right? And develops this empathy. And I think that is one of the key aspects of leadership because people are so different, but being able to identify yourself with them and meet them from their perspective and help them grow is such an important aspect. And I think for me, and with this podcast series now, it's been quite a journey to understand what the industry looks like from that other angle and to hopefully give a glimpse of that to whoever is listening or seeing. And at this point, maybe being in some of the boardrooms as well, like how does that come about?
I think the ability to listen. I think is a really strong leadership quality that is often spoken about, but not often put into practice. So I think, being in a boardroom situation and being oftentimes the only female around that table. And I have to say again, I keep using the word privilege, but I was privileged to be given the opportunity at this stage in my career to join the board of a company that I respect a lot. But it was also quite intimidating coming on as a mid-career professional and sitting at a table with people who have way more experience than me, and whom I often view as leaders that I really respect. But I think ultimately, being able to listen and to understand their perspectives, and then having the confidence to deliver my message in a way that I believe they can understand, and having the confidence to engage in debate without letting ego get in the way in the event that I'm in the minority. I think that's how I deal with situations around the board table. I think ultimately everyone around that table is there to make a decision that is in the best interest of the company. So ultimately, you're all there for the same reason. It's always important to bear that in mind.
You are there because they wanted that voice. They wanted that perspective. And in that sense, maybe it's kind of changing the usual dynamics, and it takes usually maybe some time to get adjusted to it.
Yes.
But then you are there because you're adding colors to whatever they're framing, right? And they want to know how it feels to also be a woman in this industry. What are some important considerations from that aspect, and how to accommodate, I think, the future?
Yes, I like to believe that, but I think it's not only a gender thing. I think that it's a lot about diversity of experience and also diversity of generations. Because ultimately, any decision that we make today, particularly strategic decisions, has a long-term impact. So I think, given where the industry is headed and the headwinds that the industry faces, I think it's really important that you have different perspectives, different experiences, and different views from generational views involved in the discussions, particularly around decarbonization and sustainability, just to have some checks and balances to ensure that decisions that are being made are truly decisions that are setting up business for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that diversity of thought and that diversity of experience is going to be increasingly more important in boardrooms within the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like that. And the transition again now to the change in the industry, right? Have you witnessed it? How does it feel, let's say, Maritime 7 years ago, and now, after maybe 3 years of quite proactive change towards a decarbonized maritime future?
Has the industry evolved? I think industry is always evolving. I think if I can say what is the one thing that I have seen evolve the most in a very slow moving industry, is I think people are now getting more comfortable with the idea of collaboration and with the idea of transparency. Don't get me wrong, if you sit on a panel and you bring up the word transparency and you're like, we need more transparency in the industry, you can see faces change. And transparency is still, in certain quarters, a dirty word, because a lot of players within the industry still believe that their data is what their competitive advantage is. However, I think with the regulatory push for decarbonization, and with this being really uncertain, and with digitalization becoming an important tool in helping and enabling the industry to really understand how to meet its targets, I think you see a mindset changing, that actually we do need a certain level of transparency, and transparency does not mean we are giving away all our commercial secrets. So I do think that, this is for me the most one of the most crucial changes that's taking place in the industry right now. And I think if we can get that balance right, it would really, really change the way we work within the industry.
I also think that it would allow for, let's say, faster stakeholder agreement and allow for risk sharing as well, because it is quite a risky business, this journey that we embarked ourselves on. So I think it is almost a cultural transformation, right? Because it unlocks the potential to make it work with the future fuels, infrastructures, and different energy efficiency technologies, and making it happen in the hardware sense as well, but also in a digital sense. It would help us evolve to another level of what is possible and how business can be done, and maybe new business models.
Yeah, I think that last point is probably the most important part of it. I think that, I do hope that what we're seeing now is not just a short-term reaction to the pressures of regulation, but actually a longer-term shift in terms of mindsets and business models. This is a topic which I speak quite often about the need to rethink business models, the need to rethink our contracts in order to close the data financing gap that currently exists in our contracts, particularly when it comes to thinking about how we apportion incentives and apportion risks and share benefits across the supply chain as they relate to energy saving devices, energy efficiency technology, or decarbonization. Because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've been engaged in similar conversations, where the conversation ends as soon as someone says, well, who's going to pay for it? And everyone just sits back, hands crossed, saying, well, it's not us. And, you start having this awkward silence in the room. So we need to find a way to get over that. And in my opinion, and I will also always say this, I don't have answers to anything. I have lots of opinions. I think in this particular regard, in my opinion, we do need to rethink the way we contract in order to ensure that the incentives, the risks, and the costs are split in a reasonable way across each stakeholder within the supply chain. And that's not going to be easy, but I do agree that, with better analysis of data, that should help to drive better decision making around this issue, and therefore should drive a change and the conversation as they relate to changing business models.
I also now recalled one of the sessions last week during the Singapore Maritime Week, and so many events that were happening. There was, let's say, thought leadership decarbonization session where we gathered people from different backgrounds, and it was somewhat moderated discussion, but it started with what are the challenges. And finally, we had I think 45 minutes for discussion. It ended up with people just bringing the solutions through, right? So at some point, everyone went it out from their angle, and then they were like, okay, but we can change this and we can do this. And to me, that was quite an inspiring journey to witness as well. Okay, we as humans actually want to solve it.
Yeah.
And that was so wonderful that eventually people wanted to make it better, but it needed the right people in the room, right, to figure it out.
Yes, and I think what you just mentioned in the story you just shared, I think is a really good example of how people are now more open to collaboration. But taking a step back, I think this is also symptomatic of perhaps why we've not moved forward. Because when it comes to these discussions, people jump to the solution immediately. Because there's a lot of goodwill, right? I think sometimes people underestimate how many people in the industry actually want to do the right thing for the climate, for the ecosystem, and actually want to move forward on the decarbonization agenda. But you can't move forward unless you truly take a step back to understand what are the challenges that are preventing us from moving forward, and to also truly understand, well, what needs to change today, not only in terms of business models, but in terms of behaviors, in terms of mindsets. what needs to change today in order for us to achieve the outcomes that we want in the future. And it is a journey. And I think if we jump straight to the solution, there will be many solutions that are potentially possible, but they might never materialize because the challenges would still remain. So what should we actually be focusing on first? And people also, I think, need to take a step back to ask themselves, well, if I am investing in a particular digital solution, why am I doing that? And what benefit in the mid to long term would that actually bring to my business to support my mid and long term business strategy?
And going back to you, how do you take that step back? And when do you reflect, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. I think my reflective journey started when I studied my EMBA course in 2019. And one of the exercises which our leadership professor made us engage in was to start writing a diary, every day, just 5 minutes to reflect on what we've achieved today and how that relates back to our purpose. And I have to say, until that point in time, I was probably just going with the flow. I think, people look at me, they might think, oh, she's always had it all together. She's always had a plan. She's probably always had a purpose. But the reality is no. When you join a profession like law, your career is pretty timeline based. You stay long enough, you get promoted, you get enough business in, you get promoted. You perhaps didn't have to think as much about what is it that you wanted to achieve in life, and what your purpose was, and you probably didn't have that much time or energy. So I think that was really, my executive MBA course and the leadership professor was perhaps the turning point for me when I really took a step back to think about, all right, what is it that I need in order to always feel excited and engaged and fulfilled in my career moving forward? Because, a career is more than just status and money, to me at least. And since then, I think, I like to think, although maybe my husband will disagree, that I am quite self-reflective. And I do take time every day, either when I'm having my coffee in the morning or in the evening, just to reflect on, all right, have I done today what, things that will actually really make me feel fulfilled? Or actually, did I behave in a way today that really I'm not proud of? And what can I be doing better? And the last couple of months in particular have been very instructive for me. I left my corporate job in November, and that was a huge decision for me. I gave up the usual. I gave up status. I gave up financial security because I believe that from a value perspective, that was the right thing to do for me. And I think when it comes to my leadership journey and also to my journey as a human being, that was probably the best thing I've ever done for myself, because it really allowed me to take a step back and reflect not only on the past, but also on the present and the future without having the proverbial golden handcuffs on me. And I think it's given me quite a lot of clarity as to what I hope to achieve for myself in this next stage of my career.
I can relate, and as you were saying, I got the chills because I had that moment too, right? And I was at quite a comfortable position at Maersk as well, and nice salary, and everything was so comfortable. And then there's something inside of me telling me, like, you should do that. You should be brave. Like, you should embrace this curiosity and not ask yourself, what if I did it? So, okay, let's take the plunge, right? And it is so scary because, like, it can go many ways, right? But somehow each day ever since was so fulfilling. You're riding on these crazy waves, and it is like a roller coaster, and you're going up, you're like, what's happening? And you're going down, and there's excitement, and you're screaming like, oh my God, what's happening, right?
Yeah.
But there's like an end to each of these emotions, and every day is very emotional in that sense. And somewhere within, you just have to trust yourself with the capability of handling the process, right? You can't control the outcome, and maybe it will not go the way you imagined it, how you imagined it, when. But then it's more like centering that inner superpower, right? Like, okay, I can handle this. No matter what happens, I'll figure it out. And I think in all that risk, that feeling inside is very powerful. Like, we're very true to ourselves.
Yes. And I think, I think you summarized it really, really well. And, similarly, I started getting goosebumps as well, because I think at some point in time, we need to back ourselves, right? And again, not everyone would have the luxury of being able to say, well, I'm saying no to a corporate job. There are realities, but there are many different ways of backing yourself. And I think this is something which people need to understand. And I think leaders need to start talking more about, like, when have you actually had to, take a risk and take a step forward and take the path least traveled because you knew it was the right thing to do for yourself? And to share these stories, because otherwise people might think, well, I just want to take the safe path, which is fine. I think there are different paths for different people. But if we don't come out and start sharing our stories, how can we actually role model to others within the industry to say, hey, there's more than one path out there for you. So you need to know that you need to break with best practices if you want to actually really challenge yourself. And, and someone said, you don't really know what you're made of until you've taken the path least traveled. So have fun along the way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, on this side, I have done a startup before, and it was crazy because at that point I was living in Singapore, and like I drove myself to $80 on my bank account in Singapore. And then it was like, okay, this is what I need to pay the rent. I need a job. I need to. And somehow that evolved into like me shaping Microsoft's innovation programs and driving that. But it was because I failed so badly in that sense. At that point, I believe so. But then when there was a discussion about this particular innovation program, I was like, no, we don't need that. Startup don't need it. This didn't work. And they were like, well, why don't you make what works, right? And because I like saw things not working at so many levels, that was a source of inspiration for something that was later scaled and considered successful. But having gone through that journey, you're like, actually, there's no failure, right? This was just a part of that journey. And again, like there was something inside of me that was able to convert that into eventually something positive that later led me to Maersk and now on this journey. And so like I personally, whenever I fear, I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? What am I doing? I do remember, but it's good. Like it was working out previously. Now you know a little bit better. And that's also what I would sometimes tell startups when I was, let's say, in Maersk, and when they would pitch to me, and sometimes they would share like, oh my God, we're so scared. But I'm like, it's okay. Like the fact that you're doing it and you're learning so much. And that's another thing of driving your own business, I think. It's just you push yourself to the maximum of your learning capacities. And to us who love being active and problem solving, what a nice place to be.
I think that, that's such an inspirational story. And you asked me earlier, where do I draw my inspiration from? And it's stories like this, right? It's stories like this that I think, just inspire me and give me the courage to continuously challenge myself, because to see you having taken that plunge and now doing well for yourself after having gone through the highs and lows, I'm like, well, yes, people have done it before. In a sense, it's not the path least traveled anymore because other people have traveled there before, and we just need to start talking about it and sharing it. I often think about women in leadership and actually how can women support each other through our journey. And I think it's really through such types of positive allyship. I think oftentimes the phrase positive allyship is spoken about in respect to men supporting women, but I think positive allyship between women is really important. And again, you see a lot of it at face value, but when it really comes down to women and women talking about our deepest, darkest, emotional fears, I still think we don't go as deep because ego gets in the way. But it's so important that we share our story. So again, thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you
Yeah.
too. And yeah, I do think in addition to maybe sometimes ego, it's also, well, yes, insecurities come from the ego, but it's like, okay, maybe there should be a different way about it.
Yeah.
How did that journey change you?
Wow. I think I mentioned earlier that I wasn't always this confident. I think I grew up in a society where we were assessed as whether or not we were smart or not from a very young age. And that impacts confidence quite a lot if you're not, in the top 10 in your class or you're not going to the best schools. And back in the day, it was a society that also carried a lot of judgment, particularly when, at least in my perception, when you were in the minority. So growing up, it was very confusing. Let me put it that way. And oftentimes, self-confidence would take a hit, regardless of how supportive a family environment you're in. So I think for me, the learning journey was actually a lot more internal. The learning journey related a lot more to having the confidence to start learning more about who Su Yin is, what Su Yin needs, and to accepting that this is who Su Yin is, and to understanding that I do not need to be like someone else. I do not need to be like, the other girls who were top in my class, or, who are leading a lifestyle that would, that society accepts as a lifestyle of the successful. So I think for me, my learning journey was a lot about that. And it wasn't always easy because you make mistakes along the way. You fail along the way in all aspects of your life, right? Not only career, but ranging from relationships to clothing choice, to be really like frivolous about it. And also then to career choices, the jobs that you take, the leaders that you follow. It isn't always hunky-dory, but I think finding the courage and having the right network of support to see you through these downtimes eventually helps you come out on the other side a lot stronger. So I think that's been what my learning journey has been all about. Like, how can I just accept myself for who I am, and then always put my best foot forward to do what I believe is the right thing to do, based on my value set. Yeah.
And with that, I think as women, naturally, right, we have the right to change so many times in
Yes.
a month and every month. And I think that's the beauty of the process, to allow yourself to be different at different times and
Yes.
bring your full self to the work at that time,
Yes.
and then maybe totally rediscover yourself, right?
Yes.
And then contribute to the world or the work or the
Yes.
relationship in that new form, right?
Yes.
It's almost like stepping away from the painting and then
Yeah.
coming back with inspiration, adding new elements to it. And
Yeah. I think, it's almost like you can't change something unless you can change yourself, or what works for yourself. So I always say, it has to start from within. In anything that you do, can you bring your authentic self to work? Can you bring your authentic views to what you're doing? Because as a leader, that is what will really help influence outcomes. when people feel like actually when you're saying something, it's because you truly believe in it. And if you're asking for someone's views, it's truly because you want to keep an open mind and listen to someone else's views. And if anyone senses that actually you're not sure about yourself or that you're not being authentic, that I think does influence your ability to influence as a leader and to drive impact as a leader. So I think the journey always starts from within.
Yes, and I think also when it comes to working with people, when one gives them that space to fully express themselves in their work, maybe that's not even the scope of the work at that point, but they're really passionate about it. I think the energy that they bring and how fast they can move things forward just by doing what resonates with
Yes.
them, seen it just totally change the game.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, when you have a safe speak up culture and an inclusive speak up culture at work, it actually drives better outcomes because people are bringing their views to the table. People are challenging the status quo. And through that process, what you're reaching for is not consensus, but it's reaching this outcome where, all right, all views have been brought on the table, but in the context of what is the best decision for the business, all views have been considered, and you reach an outcome that people are comfortable with to back and to align up against as being the right decision. I think consensus doesn't always work. And consensus, I think, definitely does not work when you don't have a speak up culture, because the default in that situation will then be that the loudest person in the room or the most senior person in the room will always get his or her way.
Yes, now that you were saying, I remember that double diamond framework in innovation, right? And I use it quite a lot to even, sometimes when I used to run the sessions, but even now in life, like it's this first wide approach. So you welcome all the inputs, and that is where you will remove the boundaries. Everything can come in. There's no what's realistic and what's not. And then the second process is narrowing it down and focus. And I think you explained it so well, like welcoming, but then steering it in a certain way. Maybe it won't resonate with each person, but it would lead towards a certain path.
Yes.
And then with that narrow frame, again, opening the options, finding the best ways to go about it, solutions, and then coming down with the conclusion, right?
Yeah. I think conversations are important. I think, particularly in this day and age, I think leaders cannot go in thinking that my way is going to be the highway and my way is the only right way. I think, our past experiences don't always inform what prospective outcomes could be in a similar situation, because there are always different variables and contexts change. So I think it's really important for leaders to keep a very open mind to different ideas that are out there.
And one, let's say, more innovation-like question, which vessel would you be and why with who you are right now?
Oh, I saw this question in the list of questions you sent across, and I was like, oh, I kept changing my mind every minute. But I think I want to be a container ship. And I want to be a container ship because I think the container ship is something that the end consumer can most easily relate to. Because in a port like Singapore, we see containers at the port, we see container ships around. And to me, I want to be a container ship that can actually tell the story of shipping to people at large, in order to attract talent to shipping, but also to put a face on shipping. I think in recent times, there have been a lot of news reports around the hijackings and piracy attacks on ships and on seafarers. And I see a lot of conversations around, media is not doing shipping any justice. If this happened to an aircraft carrier or an airliner, it would be much more sensational. I'm like, well, that is right. But I also then take a step back to ask ourselves, what are we as an industry doing to actually put a face on shipping? And so that's my answer, a container ship, because I think that is the easiest way to put a face on shipping.
And I will echo that with let's say, fun story. So recently I did a project with one of the creative people.
Yeah.
She does sketches on these different environmental topics. And I wanted to explain some of the complexities of the shipping. And she was like, okay, can you give me different types of vessels and explain a little bit the context so that I can choose the main character? And so I did. And she said, you know what? I think I'll choose the container vessel as the main character. I think it's the most relatable to people. And now that you also shared your view, it is the most relatable to people, it seems. And that's what we associate with shipping the most.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. It's what people see the most, and it's it's what gets them their shoes, their trainers, their iPads. They all go on a container ship.
Yes, it's yes, especially after the pandemic, we all see the value of it. And with that, maybe to almost conclude the session, but to also give you an opportunity to be the interviewer. Would you have a question for me?
Yeah, I do. Actually, you're very successful yourself, and you've taken the path least traveled. You've worked in a big corporate. You've taken a plunge into being an entrepreneur, and you've spoken to so many people from within industry. But what does leadership mean to you?
I think once upon a time, my manager told me to be a leader, you need to create a space for people to bring their best selves and ideas into the room and make them feel like it was their idea to start with, and that the progress originated from them. And that is something that kept resonating with me. But I think I am naturally a connector, and I really love building communities. So I think my stamp on that was to bring the people together and create this emotional and mental safe space for them to bring their ideas and then take them to another level. And I think that creating that space where people feel free to be themselves without judgment, without prejudice, to be very creative or totally opposite, to be very technical, but to be authentic selves in the room, in the meeting, and to drive that to a collaborative outcome. That would be leadership to me.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really resonates. And I think you are well on the way to accomplishing that through what you're doing right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being my guest and also embarking on this adventure together.
No, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.